Hi, it's Asad here from Nested Knowledge. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the quantitative synthesis. So in the last video, we talked about the qualitative synthesis and viewing the evidence maps and the Prisma flows just to sort of see visually where we are and look at and compare different treatments and interventions and sort of filter down studies based on markers of interest. In this video, we're going to be talking about the quantitative portion. So you'll actually be able to toy around and manipulate the data, so to speak, to look for outcomes of interest. We'll be able to show summary tables and scatter plots as well as the network meta-analysis or the NMA plots to visualize sort of different treatment effects from the various studies that we've collected and gathered through into our nest. So if you follow me along here, we'll go to AutoLit and click on the RCT training nest that we've been using. Now, as just a reminder, this nest was comparing the efficacies of various antiviral medications in the treatment of COVID-19. And our software team's been working tirelessly to design this beautiful nest here, this beautiful new visual here showing the protocol, the primary and secondary outcomes, the interventions and treatment groups. Just to kind of give you a broad overview, we have this nice new comments feature. So I talked about a few of these new things in the last video on the qualitative synthesis, but just wanted to hit that home again. So if you follow me along here, we'll go to the left-hand side. So as like mentioned previously, we've had videos on the literature search process, the screening process, tagging and extraction, and of course feel free to watch those again in the playlist. And we already talked about the qualitative synthesis here. Now I'm going to click here on the quantitative synthesis and first draw your attention here to these nice summary tables. So in the summary tables, we'll actually be able to filter down and view different interventions. So in this case, we were looking at various antivirals of interest. So I can go ahead and click that drop-down menu. And all the different antivirals that I've actually collected for, I can filter and view based on certain baseline characteristics and follow-up characteristics. So let's say I wanted to look at specifically male patients and I want to look at mortality data. And I wanted to pick the drug Arbidol, which is a new antiviral that's been used to treat COVID-19. So I can see that out of the total number of male patients, 100 patients were given Arbidol in this study, and one patient, it looks like, passed away from that drug. So overall, it seems like it's a very effective drug. Now, additionally, I can also look at the patient baseline characteristics and see that 28 patients had diabetes from that same study. So these are just easy ways to sort of visualize quickly what variables of interest you'd like to look at. And of course, these are we can change these up here. So if I wanted to look at patients with hypertension and baseline, so if I wanted to look at male patients with hypertension who were given Arbidol, we can see here that still, 100 patients were given Arbidol and 52 of those had hypertension. So we can sort of play around with that, look at other pharmaceutical interventions that were given. So it looks like we have categories for antibiotics and interferons and this other one here, baloxavir marboxyl, and then look at control and standard of care. And here we can actually see in the control group, we have all the different articles here showing different characteristics. So that's just some nice summary tables for you there. Next, we can click on scatter plots here. And in scatter plots, we can again compare two different variables on the X and Y axis. So here I just showed you we have male patients on the Y and mortality on the X axis, just for starters here. So we can see that among the male population, there was a certain percentage of mortality. That may not be as helpful. So on the Y-axis, we can actually look at clinical improvement. So patients that had hypertension, for example, we can look at their overall clinical improvement. So we can see that obviously patients that had higher rates of hypertension may have had larger rates of clinical improvement just because they had higher needs and more needs. We can look at patients with diabetes mellitus. So patients that maybe had lower rates of diabetes had higher clinical improvement outcomes, which might be fitting. So again, these are just different ways to sort of visualize the data in a form of a scatter plot. Finally, I want to draw your attention here to this button that says NMA, which is the network meta-analysis. So with this, you'll see this kind of interesting looking grid here comparing all the different antivirals and interventions of interest, and it will actually give you odds ratios. So if we look among our male patient population and we want to compare two different antivirals, so let's say I wanted to compare favipiravir and Arbidol. I can scroll over right here and see here that we have an odds ratio for male patients that favipiravir is 1.36 times as likely as Arbidol. So we can see that favipiravir had a greater odds ratio and a greater success than maybe Arbidol did. Similarly, we can look at antibiotics and compare to antivirals. So we can say that the odds ratio for the male patients for antibiotics is 1.88 times as likely as the antiviral lopinavir. So again, you can play around with these and really choose which antivirals you'd like to see, compare different data elements. So you can look at diabetes, we can look at let's see here, we have a lot of data, it seems like, on hypertension. So we can look at hypertension and compare odds ratios between antivirals of interest or other treatment options. So this is another great way to just see sort of the odds ratios and all of that presented in a network meta-analysis. So that's essentially quantitative synthesis for you. These are easy ways to sort of visualize and play around with the data and just see sort of where you're at. And ultimately, your quantitative and qualitative synthesis will blend in beautifully when it comes down to actually creating a manuscript that you'd like for publication. So in the next video, I'll just be going over some brief features with the manuscript editing now that it's been fully functional for a few weeks, which is a great way really to start from ground zero and build a nest, synthesize that, and then ultimately translate whatever data you've collected into a great article for publication.